Welcome to part 7 of our organizational and occupational psychiatry topics for residents. I'm Parker Schwab, current PTY4 psychiatry resident. At the timing of making these videos, I want to thank my assistant author, Sam Gardner, and advisor, David Morrison, in helping create this curriculum. Before we begin, I don't have any conflicts of interest or financial disclosures. We will be using the term org psych to encompass both organizational psychiatry and psychology topics during this course, but please note that these fields are distinct. Today, we're mostly going to be talking about psychology topics. So to go over where we've been and where we are now, so this is the last part of a 7-part series. We've gone over what organizational and occupational psychiatry is in our first section. We then covered why it matters to us as practitioners, and then also why it matters to our patients. We discussed the US Surgeon General framework for components of a healthy workplace, and then went over how to take a work history with our patients and how that might influence our treatment plans. And then we went over leave-in disability, both how to think about leave-in disability and then even how to perform those types of evaluations. And now we'll take a little bit of a detour to something that might be a little bit more fun, is to go through organizational psychology policies from the past and how they were both beneficial and maybe slightly controversial, and then also exploring how we can use that to think about where the field is going in the future, and think key things that we need to think about going forward. So just briefly to start, we'll go over what organizational psychology is. It's a field dedicated to improving organizations and employee lives. It involves studying, developing, implementing, testing, and refining organizational interventions, which are defined as any plan, change in policy, program, procedure, or system intended to shift employee attitude or behavior. So I put a couple example job types in this field. This is not exhaustive, but several examples include maybe being an in-house consultant for an organization, a treating provider for employees, and then maybe even working in academics and research. So traditionally, industrial and organizational psychologists, which is IO psychologists, have been involved in a range of benefits for workers over the last century, including developing policies such as intelligence testing, goal-setting strategies, and flexible work arrangements. However, there have been several unintended consequences of these that we should explore, including increased instances of unethical behavior, discrimination against minority groups, and then also reduced career opportunities for certain individuals. As you know, large organizations employ about half of the labor force, so you can see how these policies may have profound impacts on well-being of a lot of different people in our society. The first policy we'll go over is scientific management. This originated in the early 20th century by Frederick Taylor. It was designed to prescribe timing of tasks and eliminate waste. It was thought that it would boost worker productivity without raising costs. And then to do that, they would create incentive systems and pay workers according to the amount produced. I typically think of kind of like the Ford factory assembly line when doing this. That might not be a great example, but that's what comes to mind when I think about this. So, sorry, the lecture is going a little slow. Hopefully it'll move a little bit faster. So some of the negative consequences of scientific management is that it did prescribe mundane, repetitive tasks to employees, which increased the risk of physical injury and also increased the risk of developing mental health issues. In order to combat this, they did redesign this policy to help minimize injury. So, for example, they redesigned the height of a brick stand for certain bricklayers, which resulted in less back injuries. However, despite this, there was still a large public outcry in 1914. Congress had to form a committee to investigate this. There isn't much information on the outcome of this committee because it was so long ago, but I think this does kind of highlight that despite them trying to make modifications to it, people were still upset with this type of policy. The next policy is intelligence testing. So currently a majority of the Fortune 500 companies in higher education use some form of cognitive ability testing and applicant selection. A prime example of this is general mental ability, or what they call G. This actually has been validated by several meta-analyses and is an accepted tool used in employee selection systems that assesses developed abilities that are a result of innate talent, learned knowledge and skills, as well as environmental factors such as educational opportunities. And it's been shown to be predictive of individual performance across educational and work domains. But as you can imagine, it has caused some negative consequences, as average scores tend to be lower in minority groups or groups that don't have as many educational opportunities. It's led to numerous social consequences, including increased odds of discrimination. It's currently one of the most debated IO policies that's still in existence today. Forced drinking is the next policy we'll cover. So this was actually popular in the late 20th century and remains fairly popular today. It's estimated that approximately or greater than 60% of Fortune 500 companies use this practice in some form. Now there's a lot of mixed reception around it, as we'll go through some of the negative consequences of this. But forced ranking is when employees are ranked based on performance ratings from supervisors. They then reward a percentage of the top performers, including offering them bonuses or promotions. And then a certain percentage of the bottom performers are put on improvement plans or terminated from the company. This is often repeated annually to help clean house and allow for room for new talent. The negative consequences of this are that it may lead to decreased morale. It might be more perceived as more inaccurate and unfair by employers or employees. It may lead to increased lawsuits from employees towards the company, and then it may have an increased adverse impact on minorities as well. Goal setting is the next policy that was created by IO psychologists, which is the process of specifying objectives related to performance and planning steps of executing this. There's usually been a positive relationship between goal setting and task performance, and they've done studies that have shown that motivation increases when goals are specific, measurable, challenging, accepted, and also tied to specific outcomes. However, there are several negative consequences to this, including there may be decreased group performance if goals are focused on individual tasks. There could be increased risky decision making and unethical behaviors, which we'll show an example on the next slide. And then there's also potentially a risk of decreasing intrinsic motivation if goals are tied to group performance. So hopefully this will show up. Yep, here it goes. So we'll just watch a quick example of how this might go awry. It was the Wells Fargo scandal many years ago. We'll quickly just watch a couple seconds of this.
Tonight, the country's fourth largest bank, Wells Fargo, is paying up, agreeing to a $3 billion settlement with the Justice Department and the SEC after employees under pressure to meet sales goals created millions of fraudulent bank accounts between 2002 and 2016.
Simply put, Wells Fargo traded its hard-earned reputation for short-term profits.
All right, so I think that was a good example of how goal setting might incentivize people to take more risky or unethical decisions. The next policy is charismatic leadership. So this is a popular area of study in the 1980s and 1990s. There's a large body of evidence that shows a positive correlation with job satisfaction, motivation, performance, and innovation when companies are led by charismatic or strong leaders, which then has led to the establishment of leadership development programs, which have been pretty popular in the last 20 years. However, there are some negative consequences with this. So it has been seen that some leaders can make poor decisions that may increase follower dependence on the leader of the company. There may be leaders who focus on personal achievement at the expense of others. And so organizations are strongly encouraged to consider leaders' individual values and motives before promoting them to positions of power. Group cohesion is the extent to which group members feel committed to one another. They've done meta-analyses that demonstrate positive correlations between cohesion, satisfaction, and performance. However, too much group cohesion can be negative, and that it might decrease productivity. There is a risk of groupthink, which is the tendency to agree with other members rather than objectively appraise. Many examples of this are things like the Enron, like unethical behaviors at Enron, the Challenger disaster, and then social media. I like to think of like echo chambers, where we kind of get sucked into thinking a certain way because we're only seeing certain viewpoints on social media based off of our likes. Bias training is another area of possible controversy. So bias training is the training that we probably all take every year at our companies, but for possible systems. But it's training to increase awareness of bias, prejudice, stereotypes, and attitudes. And overall, it's intended to make organizations more welcome of diversity. However, if this is not done correctly, it potentially may inadvertently enforce stereotypes. For example, sexual harassment training might increase gendered beliefs, could lead to decreased willingness to report harassment, and may increase victim blaming if it's not done in a cautious way. Flexible work policies are policies designed to increase employee control of when and where they work. It includes things like compressed work weeks, remote work, flexible scheduling, and special leave of absences. There have been studies and empirical evidence that has shown that these policies can improve employee well-being and health. It can reduce costs and improve work-life balance. However, sometimes if people take leave of absences, this may be looked upon by the company as a negative, which may lead to less wage growth, fewer promotions, lower performance ratings. I like to think of maybe like a person taking time off for maternity leave, and then we all hear the examples of that leading to lower levels of promotions because of taking time off for maternity. So traditionally, IO psychology or industrial and organizational psychology is focused largely on the benefits of its policies and have not really focused as much on the possible consequences. And so now there's this call of need to maybe refocus the research on maybe the unintended consequences that we were going over today. The paper that I was reading proposed that there may be 7 social forces that are leading to us not really focusing on the consequences of this, 4 of which are internal to IO psychology, and then 3 are external to IO psychology. The 4 that are internal to IO psychology include causal attribution, which is just the statistical theory that like correlation is not causation. There may be adverse events that are related to confounders, not the actual thing that we're studying. And what makes this complex is that organizational policies occur in complex systems with many variables, and so it can be hard to narrow in on what might be contributing to the actual effect. There's also simplification bias, which is the tendency to reduce complex information into things that are more comprehensible or comprehensible. It's complicated by the fact that policies often studied are nonlinear relationships, which may require more complex statistical analysis that managers may not understand. And so it might be a complicating factor there. Theory mania is the fact that discovering new theories is more appealing than looking at old ones. And so there may be a bias there in terms of focusing our efforts on finding new policies instead of looking at the consequences of old. And then divided loyalties. So often in IO psychology, there's multiple stakeholders, including both the employer and the employee. And oftentimes those things are those stakeholders have competing interests, and so it can be hard to navigate that as a researcher. So the other social effects that might be causing us not to investigate the side effects of policies is a marketing problem. So the focus on the side effects may skew public perception and maybe might make people not want organizational psychology policies anymore. There's also a lack of accountability. So things like a lack of regulatory agencies like the FDA for medications. There's resource constraints. So things like the fact that organizations are less willing to fund research that won't benefit them. So if they already have a policy that they feel like is benefiting them, why would they want to investigate potential consequences of that may lead them to not be able to employ that policy anymore? So in order to combat this and kind of move the industry forward or the field forward, they have several different recommendations in this paper, starting from reframing the question to then developing reporting systems, incentivizing research, establishing effect size guidelines, advertising known side effects to the public, and then educating future researchers are all things that I recommend to help advance the field. So the first one, reframing the question, this is moving towards trying to predict possible consequences before we even start creating policies. So maybe proposing each policy with this type of framework. So if we do a certain intervention to accomplish a certain result, it might affect what? Like what might be the consequences be? The next recommendation is to develop reporting systems. So that would include creating a database to report adverse events, similar to what the FDA does for medications. We want to incentivize research. So this means increasing funding for the field, developing journals dedicated to the study of side effects. We also want to establish effect size guidelines, which means that we want to map the frequency, intensity, and confidence of reported side effects to establish a risk level and stratify risk of each policy, and then also research the validity of these proposed risk stratification, In addition, we want to advertise known side effects. So that means informing all stakeholders of positive, negative consequences of policies, which allows for informed decision-making. And then also we want to educate future researchers of the need for additional research on consequences of these policies. So that was a little bit of a detour from what we've been doing before. I hope this was a fun exercise and got you thinking about more psychology policies that have been in place and might kind of give you a better look as to the types of policies and structures within organizations that might be affecting our patients. This does conclude our curriculum on organizational psychiatry policies and topics for residents. I hope it was helpful for everyone. And yeah, I wish everyone the best of luck with their careers.